Hey guys, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today we're going to be talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart because I think it's something that all women either have struggled with or struggle with currently in their lives. Our timelines. I have but one message to give to you today. And if you take nothing else away from what I'm about to say, please take this with you. Throw the whole timeline away. And let me tell you why. So often we kind of get ourselves caught up in this scheduled timeline for life. Like, I want to graduate college by this age. I want to be, I want to move out of my parents' house by this age. I want to buy my car. Then I want to get married. Then I want to buy a house. And then life comes back and it shows you that you really have absolutely no control over what happens to you anyway. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story, and hopefully you can take something away from this and kind of give yourself a break, relax, relate, release. You know what I'm saying? Like, do it like my girl Whitley. Today we're going to talk about why it is important for you to throw the whole timeline away. So let me give you some backdrop. Like I said in my intro video, I'm 30 years old, and when I imagined my life at 3, I thought that I would be married. I thought I'd have kids. I thought that I'd be working in some fancy place, making a whole lot of money, driving a really nice car. Like, that's all I thought that I wanted to do with my life. And then life happened, and I kind of found myself in some different situations, questioning everything that I thought I ever knew. But it was a great experience because I really needed this time to grow and to decide what I really wanted from my life and what was, most beneficial. My parents have been married for a whole lot of years, somewhere close to 40. And so they got married when my mom was 24 and my dad was 25. And for whatever reason in my head, I always thought to myself, I want to be married by the time I'm 24, just like my parents. So I had this idea in my head all along that, this is the way that life was gonna go. Well, I went to high school, graduated, went to college. College was an interesting journey. I'll talk about that at some point too. But while I was in college, I was there to get my degree, but I was also there to try to see if I could see what was going on in the water, see if I could find me a little something. And so I ran into situation after situation, guy after guy, thinking and hoping that this person could be the one for me. Mind you, I'm 19 years old. Sis, at 19, they don't come ready-made, okay? So, not to say that people don't and can't get married young, but in my experience, you might want to take a little bit of time to get to know yourself before you venture out there and try to see if you can find a husband. But anyway, that's what I was looking for. Every guy that I met, went on dates with, I really wanted to know, if this person could be my life partner. Because I grew up in church and everybody always talked about, dating with purpose. And while that is definitely a thing, you need to know the purpose as to why you're dating in the first place. So around 21 or 22, all of my friends just started getting married. I mean, all of them was getting married. And I was the only one left behind, and it had me questioning myself, is there something wrong with me? Why haven't I met the one yet? And then it had me in a position where I was kind of thinking back to some other relationships that I had been in, and I was wondering, what is it about me that puts me in this position where it seems like the guys who I date or the guys that I have feelings for are not moving in the direction of marriage, and all of my other friends and their mates are. And so I literally slipped into this mini stage of depression because I felt like an old maid at 22. And it was because of everything that I had always been told along the way. One of the things I heard all the time, especially in church, was, it's better to marry than to burn with passion. And I hate the fact that church people use that term use that scripture out of context. that's not always the answer. I know a lot of people who got married really, really young and their relationships didn't last because they were doing what the church told them to do. And unfortunately, that wasn't what they were supposed to do at that particular time. But you don't see that like that when all of your friends are getting married and starting families. So, I was depressed. Like, I felt bad about myself. I gained like a whole lot of weight because one thing I did then and kind of still do now, sometimes when I'm sad, is I stress eat. I sad eat. I cry eat. I like to eat. Food makes me feel good, but that wasn't healthy. And so I found myself in a position where, I was just sad. And I needed to figure out what I needed to do next in order for me to pull myself out of that situation, one, or hopefully meet the one so that I could start the life I thought I would always have. Well, when I was in grad school, I took this class and we were talking about human development. And so we talked about the stages of life, and my professor said, raise your hand if you're between the ages of 23 to 27, I think he said. And so all of us who fit within that range raised our hands. Then he said, raise your hand if your life looks absolutely nothing like you thought it would at this point. Raise my hand again. He said, raise your hand if you feel like you're behind everybody who's in your friendship circle. I raised my hand again. At that point, I started having a little mini panic attack because I'm like, what's wrong with me? What is he about to say next? And the next thing he said was, if you raise your hand and answer all of those questions, you might find yourself in a quarter-life crisis. And at that point, it was like the light bulb went off. Like, you've heard of midlife crises before, but the quarter-life crisis is a real thing. We're going to talk about that in another video at some point. I was having a hard time coming to grips with like what my life looked like at that particular point. And so he basically said, take heart. Don't feel as though everything has to look a certain way. Success is not a linear process. Like, sit down, think about your life, and figure out what it is that you're doing right and things that you can look forward to in the future. So I went home that night and I actually sat down and asked myself this question. I'm stress eating. All of my friends are married. I'm sad. I don't feel like I have anybody. I'm lonely. And then I asked myself, like, do you even really want to be married at this particular time? And the answer to that was no. Like, I had gotten so caught up in, the wedding bug, not the marriage bug, but the wedding bug, that I never really took the time to ask myself, like, do I want to be married this day? If God were to drop my husband out of the sky today, would I be ready for marriage? What things about myself do I need to work on? Or what things about myself at this particular moment make me wife ready? And honestly, I couldn't answer any of those questions. Like, at that particular time, I was still very selfish with like my space and my time. Do I live up to the standard that I expect for somebody else to live up to? Do I live up to the standard that I've set for myself to live up to? And so I had to kind of take a seat back from the table and actually, look at what things I wanted to work on in my life. What also happened during that time was I discovered that there was absolutely nothing wrong with me. There was nothing wrong with me. Nothing about me was off-putting for guys. Now, I've been told a lot, you can be intimidating. But at the end of the day, the person who's for me, I'm not going to intimidate. He's not going to be afraid of my light or afraid of what I have to offer the world. He's not going to be afraid of me at all. So I had to really and truly take some time out for myself and just let myself be. And when I did that, it really and truly made a difference in my life. It made a difference in how I handled myself, how I handled other situations. I let myself off the hook. There were a couple of things that I discovered when I was literally holding myself captive and bound to this timeline. Like, I found myself comparing myself to other people, which is the absolute worst thing that you can do, because your life is your life and their life is their life. So when you're sitting around wanting their life, it makes you feel bad about where you are, what you have, what you do and don't have, where you thought you would be and you're not. Like, comparison is literally the ultimate killer of your happiness. Like, I had a very difficult time comparing myself to others. I would get on social media and it seemed like every time I scroll, like there's somebody who's getting married, somebody getting pregnant, somebody who just started a new job, or they're making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year, and I was still at that particular time of my life on hourly pay. Like, my very first job out of college, I made $8.61 an hour plus commission if the people who I made the sale to actually got their services installed, and that wasn't a guarantee. So I didn't have any kind of stability in my paycheck. So I really struggled with knowing that there were other people out here who were doing it, for lack of better terms, and my life just was not going the way that I thought it would, which in turn made me even more unsatisfied with my life. Another thing that I learned was that I was running on autopilot. Like, I just was going, trying to make this timeline happen. And I missed out on everything that was good and great going on around me because, you know, I just had to get to the goal. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with being goals oriented. Like, I'm goals oriented. I feel like it's probably one of my better qualities. And you should absolutely like set goals for yourself to reach and put yourself on a schedule so that you are working towards completing those goals. But you have to remember to be flexible. And that's one thing that I was not at that time. I was not flexible, which is the reason why I would go into my room and have these little mini meltdowns, because I could not get my life to just do what I wanted it to do. And then the last thing that I learned during that time was that I didn't really want their life. I wanted my life. But because I was so focused on what I didn't have, I couldn't really see the forest for the trees. And so, you know, it really and truly put me in a position where I was just uptight all the time. Like, I couldn't let my hair down and just let loose and do what I had to do because, you know, I was just focused on making sure that I hit my goals and hit my markers. And so I don't want that for anybody. Like, if you're out there and you're struggling with comparing yourself to other people, if you're holding yourself captive to a timeline, like, make sure you drop that in the comments below. Like, I really want us to talk about that. I know what it's like. I know where you are. I know how difficult it is to feel like you're working for something and it's just not manifesting. I'm just here to tell you, sis, it's okay. Like, it's really okay. It is okay for your life to look different than you thought it would. So I want to leave you with these things. We're going to talk about 5 reasons why you should just throw the whole timeline away. Reason number 1, it's not going to turn out the way you thought it would anyway. So thinking about, you know, some things that I've experienced in my own life, you know, when I was in undergrad, I thought that I was just going to jump, hop, and skip right into a graduate program. So much so that my roommates and I, shout out to y'all, I love y'all. But my old roommates and I, like, we signed our names on a lease for a second year, and none of us had jobs at the time because we all thought we were just gonna get into grad school, or we were all just gonna get jobs and everything was gonna be okay. So much so that I only applied to one grad school. I didn't put myself in a position to consider any other opportunities or any other schools out there. I took the GRE the day that my application was due because I just thought everything was gonna magically work itself out until it didn't. And when I got that denial letter, my whole entire world came crashing down. Not just because the road to my career was gonna be on hold, but because, like every other typical college student, I relied on and depended on a refund check. So now I'm in a new leasing agreement in an apartment with real bills that I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford to pay or not because I don't have a job and I'm not in grad school and graduation is 3 weeks away. I did not set myself up for success. I just really didn't. And so what that meant for me was that I'm going to still go to school, but I'm gonna have to figure out an alternative route to get there, because me going in the traditional way wasn't gonna happen. For one, I couldn't change my measly little GPA, at least not in enough time before graduation. And looking back, I could have stayed in school another semester, but I was so pressed to just get on the timeline that I didn't consider like where I was at that moment. And so I had to take a backdoor option. Like, I had to sit out of school a semester. I worked 3 jobs that didn't pay a lot until I got into grad school. I had to take the GRE 3 times. And even the last time that I took it, I didn't have the exact score that I needed on the math portion to get into school anyway. I had to go in through a different department and then transfer over into the counseling department later on, so I could show them and prove to them that I was able to do their graduate level work. Like, my life did not turn out the way that I thought it would with regard to me going to grad school. And you know what? It's okay, because when it's all said and done, when I graduated in 2014, I graduated with a degree. Unless I told anybody, nobody would know that I had to transfer around and take some time off of school, and I had to do some different things here and there, and I had to retest. Nobody knew that. And you know what? It doesn't matter, because when it's all said and done, my degree says that I have a master's. My degree says that I'm able and licensed to work in my state within my position or field that I'm in. So it doesn't really matter. Like, it's okay. It is really okay if it doesn't turn out the way that you thought it would, because the end goal is going to be so much better than anything you could have imagined in the first place. Reason number 2, you're going to miss out on the beauty of right now. While you're sitting around waiting for life to happen, life is happening right now. Like, when you're focused on your timeline, you really and truly can't see the opportunities that are available to you right now in this space. And that's exactly what I did. Like, I didn't see, that there were, even thinking about like within the context of like marriage and finding suitable mates, because I was so stuck on the type of guy that I wanted to marry and the time frame that I wanted to be married in, and I wanted to be married by this age. I missed out on the opportunity to simply have fun with the whole dating process. So much so that I didn't even like dating. And even now, sometimes dating is a little, but that's just, we'll talk about that. But like, I didn't see that there were other options for me available, and that I didn't have to marry the one person that I thought I was going to marry at that time. And thankfully so, it didn't work out, but it wasn't supposed to, because that's not what I was supposed to be doing with my life at that time. And that's not who I was supposed to be tied to. You miss out on so much going on around you. Like, sometimes some of the greatest, things that you'll ever do within your life is not because of the fact that you planned it, but it'll be because of the fact that you've had some random experience or some random encounter with somebody who's made you change your perspective and made you think about life in a way that you never have before. And because of that, that's the reason why you're going to do what you're going to do. Like, even for me, I thought way back when I went to college that I was going to be, a lawyer. The whole reason I even went to the college that I went to was because they have a law school. So I wanted to kind of follow a path along the way. However, when I got there, I discovered that, and no shade to the lawyers, like I have, my friends, I got a lot of lawyer friends. However, for me, that was boring. Like, I didn't enjoy political science. I didn't enjoy the legality of it all. I didn't enjoy the legal system. So I had to let that go. So I changed my major to psychology, and I thought, I'm a psychology major, I'm gonna be a psychologist. And unfortunately, because I couldn't get into grad school, like I said, I had to go and find another job somewhere. And so one of the jobs that I took after leaving my first job after college, which was in a call center, was to work in a school. So I worked in a middle school. I had no experience with kids. I didn't even know if I liked kids at the time, because I'm one of the youngest members of my family. And so I only took that job because a friend of mine told me how much it paid, and it paid $4 more than what I was making in the call center. So I took that opportunity. But that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because when I initially applied for grad school, I was going to go in as a mental health counselor. I didn't get in, so I had to take some time away from school so that I could kind of do what I needed to do to qualify to go. However, me working in that middle school showed me that I love kids. I didn't know that I love kids. And it is literally my lifelong passion, my lifelong goal, my lifelong mission to always in some form of fashion work with students. I wouldn't have known that if I had followed the path that I thought that I was going to follow. Now, granted, I did kind of get caught up in the whole, oh my God, my life looks like this. However, there was a lot of beauty happening around me in the situation that I was placed in. And if I hadn't have taken a second and taken a break away from my timeline to look around and see a new perspective, I don't know where I would be right now. I am the happiest I've ever been in my life at this particular point in my life because I'm doing what I'm called to do. But I never would have discovered what I was called to do in this life and what my life's purpose was if I hadn't have just sat down and not looked at my first job in the school system as me just being a teacher assistant. I literally took that job and took that experience and made a career out of it. I made an extension of my career out of it. You can do the same thing no matter what that area is. If it's marriage, if it's your job, if it's some things that you're passionate about, some goals that you want to reach. Don't miss out on the beauty of right now in the moment, because what you're going to find is that living in this moment is going to create new goals and new notches in your timeline. You're going to be much more happier with those things than you will be with the things that you already had on your timeline from when you were 3. Reason number 3. You're going to drive yourself crazy. Now, I totally understand that anxiety and depression for some people is really and truly a situation that they clinically and mentally cannot help. However, a lot of situations of anxiety and depression are really self-inflicted. Like, you have to take a step back from what you thought was gonna happen and just let life happen. You have no control over your life anyway. So why drive yourself insane trying to live up to this timeline or live up to some expectation that you set for yourself that you really and truly don't have to live up to? I find that in the moments in my life when I've been the most anxious and I've been the most depressed about things, it's because I would not allow myself to deal with the fact that I had no control over what was going to happen. I had no control over the decisions committee for grad school. I had no control over how that particular breakup took place. I had no control over anything. I didn't even have control over if the person who interviewed me for my first or my second position outside of school were gonna hire me or not. I had no control. So you just need to go ahead and yield yourself to whatever. Like, yield yourself to life. Let life happen. Don't feel like you have to make life happen, because unfortunately, you don't have any control over it anyway. Like, you're going to put yourself in a position where you're going to be so anxious and so depressed about what you do and don't have right now that when the actual life you're supposed to have comes around, you're going to be too caught up in your little cocoon to see it happening for you. Do not allow yourself to be bound by anything like that. Like, take a seat back. It really is okay. Don't go crazy. Reason number 4. You take up all of the vacant space in your creative space because you refuse to be flexible. So what do I mean by that? When you're super rigid and your life is super regimented, you put yourself in a position where you're not flexible. And flexibility is right smack dab in the middle of creativity. Like, creative people aren't confined to anything. They literally let their minds just be free and allow things to come to them and to kind of put pieces together as they come. And it's so freeing when you allow yourself to be in that space, because you discover new gifts and talents that you didn't even know that you had. So if anybody had told me back in 2009 when I was having a literal meltdown that I would have a nonprofit 9 years later where I had the opportunity to help girls who come from the same communities and same neighborhoods that I come from, and put them and point them in the right direction to be college bound, I would have laughed them to scorn. Because as far as I was concerned, in 9 years, I was going to have a bachelor's degree. I was going to have a master's degree. I would have been married with 2 kids, no dogs because I don't do animals, a white house with a red door, picket fence, driving the Benz. I have none of that at this point. Well, I do have degrees, but like, I don't have a family. I don't have a lot of the things that I thought I would have by this point. But I know people who have all of those things and they don't like their lives at all. I didn't know that I was this creative. Like, I didn't know that I could do something that was important and make a difference in other people's lives. Because for so long, I had been centered around my timeline. Me creating my nonprofit was literally a labor of love. And I can't even really say labor because it did not feel like a job. Like, all of the pieces really just fell right into place. I took the whole summer of 2016 and wrote out like things that I needed, things that I wanted to do, programs that I wanted to have. I made goals for myself for my program, but it was within my creative space, not within the regimented space that I had been living in for so long. And even now, like, I continue to create things and I continue to make up new things to do with my girls. And it's so much fun because I'm a creative person. I believe that as humans, our lives are really and truly made up by the experiences that we have and not necessarily by what we plan. So, let the creative space with which your life is supposed to use be what really drives you and not necessarily that timeline that you've been leaning on. Reason number 5. What you thought you might have wanted is probably a little too small for you anyway. You are not a fortune teller and you cannot foresee the future. So what you thought you might have wanted 5 years ago, by the time you actually make it to year 5, there's probably something that's going to be bigger and better out there for you anyway. Like, even in the context of a house. So I knew that when I moved back to my hometown, when I was about to complete grad school, that I wanted to buy a house. After living in Durham living in Durham on my own, away from dorm room living, for 3 or 4 years at that point, I had given probably somewhere around $30,000 to $40,000 away in rent for something that I would absolutely never own. Which is the reason why homeownership is definitely the way. But I knew that I wanted a house. So when I moved back home, I purposefully moved back home with my parents and did not rent an apartment because I didn't want to give any more money away to people or to companies that I wouldn't get a return on my investment for. So I knew I wanted a house. I made a list of things that I wanted. And so I knew what my price point was going to be. I knew that, I wanted vaulted ceilings. I knew that I wanted a 3-bedroom. But I could only see within that miniature scope that I had been looking through because, at that point, I had only lived in an apartment. So I kind of was still thinking about apartment living. Like, I kind of still wanted something that was smaller, something that was confined. Fast forward, 5 years later, the house that I actually have now is way bigger and way better than anything that I could have imagined at that particular time. Because for one, I had just started my very first job as a school counselor. So I was making what they make for 0 years of experience, which is less than even, that's another story for another day. Advocate for your North Carolina educators. Shameless plug. But anyway, I was making the most I had ever made in my life at that point, but I didn't realize the type of money that I would have access to years down the road because I could only see with what I could see at that point. There were things that I have in my house now that I didn't even know that I wanted at the time until I found it. If I had actually had the opportunity to get the house that I initially wanted, 5 years ago, I would have outgrown that house extremely fast and would have had to buy a new house in the process. Like, you want to always have a dream or have something that you can grow into. If I had gotten the house that I wanted then, I would have outgrown that house so fast, because 5 years ago, me having a nonprofit was never even on the radar. Like, I was content with working for the state for 30 years and getting my retirement check and going to the beach. Like, that was it. I didn't know that I wanted a nonprofit. I didn't know that I had an entrepreneurial, kind of spirit. I didn't know that I didn't really want to work for anybody long term. I didn't know. Those were not things that I had in my scope at that time, but the experiences that I've had over the last 5 or 6 years is what really and truly has me in the headspace that I'm in right now. You do not want to confine yourself to your timeline. Like, imagine if you have this idea, even about a mate. Like, let's say you have this idea about this man that you want, until you actually meet the man that you're supposed to marry. Like, that guy is gonna be so much better, not even on paper, but just in life, than the guy that you imagined before, or even much better than the guy who you were dating those years ago. Like, I can think about a couple of guys that I've dated in my past that if I had have stayed with them, I would have been stifled. I would have been in a position where I wouldn't have had the opportunity to really grow into who I am today, because those guys were not people who wanted me to be that person. Those guys were not okay with the full extent of my potential. They were not okay with any of those things. I've had very few guys in my past who would have been okay with the person that I am today. And even thinking about how I was back then, I was so small-minded in that area that I would have been content enough to just let it happen. And what would have eventually happened was I would have hit another quarter-life crisis type situation in a marriage that I was never supposed to be in the first place. And who knows where I'd be today. Like, throw the timeline away, sis. You don't need it. Just live life. Like, trust the process. Keep going forward. And if something doesn't work out, don't feel like there's something wrong with you or something that, you could have done differently. Sometimes there's nothing you could have done differently. Sometimes it just is what it is, and we hit these roadblocks in life to detour us on the road and the path to where we're actually supposed to be and not where we thought we were supposed to be. I really hope that this was something that was helpful for you guys. Please make sure that you comment down below. Tell me what you think. Tell me about your experiences. Let's dialogue. I really and truly cannot wait for this to be an ongoing conversation. We're going to talk about some other things that I, dropped here and there throughout the video. I'm so happy that you came to my channel and that you clicked on this video. Before you leave, make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe, and hit the bell down below so that you can get the notifications when I do post videos. See you next time.